With $1.8 trillion in housing debt, Aussie household debt levels have hit record highs, but we think that might be changing. Figures are showing we're taking out fewer loans and smaller ones. We're borrowing less for investment housing, but also for owner-occupier, we learnt this week. We're limiting housing debt, we're also cutting personal debt, and we've got fewer credit cards. The big question for the economy is whether we can survive the withdrawal symptoms. Jack Delosa is founder of The Entourage. He's with us tonight, and Claire Kimball, founder of The Squiz, both here for Taking Stock. What do you think, Claire? We got a problem, or are we finally getting on top of it?
It seems like we're getting on top of it, but there's a long way to go. There's a lot of debt out there. That period of time where it seemed, I remember I was looking for a mortgage at about that time, where they seemed to just be giving money out hand over foot and being terrified at the amounts of money that banks would give me. And all of a sudden now I think if I went to get a mortgage it would be down to the, you know, why are you spending $5 on toast?
Yes, apparently it is a bit like that. Yeah.
It's not just us that are changing. I think clearly the rules have changed a lot. But I just remember back in the early days when I was starting out and working and trying to save and not really getting very far, and my mum putting me on the right track about saving for a deposit to get a first apartment. And the rule always was, with her, and it stuck with me, you can get as much, it doesn't really matter what the debt number is, just as long as you can service it.
Yes.
And for a rainy day, service it within a good sort of limit that you're not going to lose sleep over.
Can be used for the right purposes.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, you've got to kind of deal with it, which is the problem, I think. And as you said, when it comes to the housing market, we have been really dealing with that. We've been piling debt on debt on debt, and, you know, various economists are very worried about the household debt situation. And, in fact, global economists who look at Australia are kind of aghast at, like, the kind of debt levels we have, although it seems to have been okay so far. But this is why some are very worried people say this could all be a bubble about to burst. Jack, got a view?
I think there's a lot of merit to this argument, which is a stance that I don't often take. But, you know, Australia has $1.8 trillion in housing debt, right? And so the media start throwing around the number $1.8 trillion. Everyone thinks it's a large number. And so in the absence of any context or relative to another number, it's hard to decipher how big is that number. So I went and looked at America, right? So Australia has 1.8 trillion, America has 8.8 trillion. Now, if you sort of round out the numbers, you assume their population is 10x ours. That means that our housing debt, relatively speaking, is considerably higher than it is in America. And so that was quite staggering for me to learn. I do think we do have an addiction to debt. I mean, it's obviously becoming more difficult for you know, the average housing investor or owner-occupier to actually access finance. That's probably a good thing. I don't think our love of debt is waning. You know, I think that's a much deeper human behavioural thing that will never change.
As you said, isn't it?
You know, it sort of comes down to greed and instant gratification and all of that, accelerating the speed at which you can purchase things. I don't think, like, that's just not going to change. What is changing is it becoming harder to access finance, and I think that's healthy.
And of course, as long as we invest, and it's kind of what you said as well with debt, if it goes towards things that, well, firstly, if you can pay it off in the first place, but if it's towards things that are productive to businesses, and, you know, you're speaking with startups and founders all the time, they probably borrow money from all over the place, not just the banks, that's for sure. You know, if it's going towards something productive, that's okay.
100%.
The problem with housing is not a very productive way to kind of invest your money in terms of a payback.
Yeah, the general rule of thumb is if you're taking on debt and that debt is going to enable you to earn a future income stream that will exceed the interest that you're paying on the debt, then you're likely to profit from that, and so you can call it an appreciating asset or an income generating asset. The real problem comes in credit card debt and over shopping and all of that sort of stuff. That serves very little purpose other than instant gratification, and it doesn't set one up for financial success. It's
Valentine's Day, so we've got to talk dating on Valentine's Day. What about debt in a dating situation? Is it a deal breaker?
So I'm a romantic. I don't think it's a deal breaker. But my girlfriend is in studio tonight and she's from Macquarie Bank. So she may have a different view than I do. But as far as I mean, like, the realist in me... Love's love, man. The realist in me acknowledges that many people have kids and the finance is a really important part of life. I get that. And so is it a consideration? I'd hope not, but probably yes. Is it a deal breaker? Not for me. No, of course not.
Claire?
For me, at this point in time, just someone that doesn't smell too bad and, like, you know, has a pulse is probably about my criteria.
My mum just says they can't smoke, they can't drink and they can't gamble. So, well, who's left?
Yeah, that's right.
Australia, come on.
Yeah, exactly. Not interesting anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, there was one cool list I did see. If we want to actually have a good answer to this, because, I mean, no one's experts, right? But I was kind of going around the internet. There was a pretty good list of if debt is a deal breaker, there's probably a couple of signs. Debt isn't being treated like a big deal by that person. Like, yeah, I've got debt, no dramas.
Fine, yeah.
Love is love. There's no remorse. No problem with it. Yeah, well, that was it.
Yeah.
I'm in debt. What can you do about it? No change in behaviour and no plan to get out of it. If you can kind of address, you know, all of those things, it shouldn't be a deal breaker. That was this particular author's view. I thought that was a pretty good one to summarise things.
That sounds like a person that you'd just be concerned about more broadly, really, to be honest.
Yeah, well, exactly. Now, US President Donald Trump hasn't had time to play much golf lately. Well, not as much as he's used to, given the recent government shutdown. But not to worry, he has installed a room-sized golf simulator at the White House. It was at a personal cost of $50,000. People are going crazy on the internet about this one. Anyone find that a big deal?
There's a need to be outraged about Trump, full stop, I think.
An immense pleasure to be found.
Like, insert story here.
Yeah.
There is a bit of that, I think.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
But the idea, I think, that if he's not at his resorts, which I think on a conservative estimate has cost American taxpayers in excess of about $50 million for him to travel backwards and forwards from the White House to whether it's Florida, I think that he goes to the most, to go and do that. That's probably a pretty good saving. But I mean, for a guy that really clocks on work, there was his private diaries published the other week. The clock's on at work at 11 a.m. and finishes at about 5.
Wow.
Plenty of golf time in the White House that you can...
But see, there was a government shutdown and, look, there was about 800,000 federal employees without pay at that time and he couldn't go golfing. So I think the time...
And the tweets that he couldn't get out of the...
couldn't get out
of the White House. So lonely in the White House.
Bad look that, you know, he couldn't... It was so lonely he had to get a golf simulator. But there is an element of this that people do jump on it because it's Donald Trump. Because in fact, Obama also had a golf simulator. That's right. But that's probably been forgiven, I think.
I'm with Claire. I mean, I'm not one to you know, enthusiastically defend Donald Trump, but there's two ways to look at this. Firstly, he paid for it out of his own pocket, so that is important. And Obama did do the same thing. It was just an older, you know, more archaic version of the same thing. And no one complained about it when Obama did it. So I think the act in and of itself of building this golf simulation thing is okay. What's not okay is in 2013, when Obama did it, Trump lashed out at him on Twitter saying, you're supposed to be running the company, instead you're busy playing golf. And so the hypocrisy isn't okay, but I think
again, a feature of the Trump.
Oh yeah, absolutely characteristic. Yeah, correct. So yeah, the hypocrisy is not okay, and
and it was funny. I mean, I think it was well summed up by a tweet I saw, because as you mentioned, it comes just after that. It was kind of an expose. 3 months of diaries show he has 60% of his day is executive time, and no one knows what the hell that means.
Yes, that's right.
And it was funny because he came out. It was only a few days ago, coming out to say no president has ever worked harder than me. Pretty much. I mean, roughly, quote unquote. And then 2 days later, oh yeah, and I installed that $50,000 golf simulator. It's like,
he's
really
also the best president, I think, hasn't he?
Yeah, self-proclaimed.
Totally. But actually, President Nixon installed a bowling alley. Eisenhower put in a putting green, and Obama actually had an existing tennis court turned into a full basketball court. So they all do it. But certainly it does seem worse when it is Trump, I've got to say. An organisational psychologist has a sneaky job interview question to figure out what it's really like to work somewhere. So you're going for the job interview, and of course, if you ask the HR person to tell us about the culture, you'll get the usual, you know, buzzwords, innovation, teamwork, that kind of thing. But if you really want to find out about a company, you should ask the employees there to tell you a story about something that happened at their organisation that wouldn't happen anywhere else. And perhaps by asking that question, you might unlock a bit more of what exactly goes on. Jack, do you think that's a good way of doing it? And
I don't know about how meaningful that question would be. I mean, it will give you a glimpse into the culture that isn't usually, the side of the culture that isn't usually spoken about. For me, I don't think it'll be hugely indicative. I mean, we flip our entire recruitment process, because what he's saying is absolutely right. I think a recruitment process is so artificial and so surface level, because the interviewee comes in with a perfectly manicured resume and the interviewer says we're perfect and flexible work hours and free beer on Friday. And it's this really shallow. And so from an employer standpoint, we sort of flip that whole thing on its head, and we base our entire recruitment process on what we call deselection. So we tell them what's good about the company, and then we tell them, we look at the individual, we assess what's everything that's going to prevent them from loving working here, and we table all of it. It's hard, it's high expectations, it's long hours, you know, and
boss is a bastard.
Boss is a prick. You know, clearly they've probably worked that out by that point, but nonetheless, we make it explicit.
To his eyeballs, maybe.
Girlfriend works at Macquarie Bank. You know, all these things. And so we give them every opportunity to deselect themselves from coming to work from us, and it's the person that gets to the end of that process that's like, I get it, I think I've got a holistic and honest picture of the culture holistically here, and I'm still really interested, and that's the person we want to come and work with us.
Love that. Claire?
Or they're a bit deluded.
Everybody that works for me is delightfully deluded. You have to be clear.
Yeah, exactly. I think the problem with that sort of mentality is that those war stories always tend to be negative. When you think about them, what's the kind of trench stories? You go to the
all the
stories,
Christmas party stories.
Why it's so hard, or why X personality is really weird, different, interesting. They're really difficult stories. And when I think back to the jobs that I had, and you're telling stories, whether it's with colleagues or with other people, to try and explain what it was like to work somewhere, it's the extreme. Yeah. It's never the great, because that tends to get forgotten a lot more. It's those scarring things, or the things that stick with you a bit longer. Yeah. For me, the question to ask, I think, is usually something around just how does the morning work? I think if you can work out how the morning works, the rest comes into line, because how people show up at the start of the day is really a good...
How does your morning work?
Oh, it's just like, well, 3:30, you know.
So the founder of the company is up at 3:30.
We do a podcast, not a video, for a reason.
That's quite telling. Yeah. The founder's getting up at 3:30.
Absolutely.
It's pretty kind of hard working. You do pick up...
And across the week, like how I am on a Monday is very different to how I am on a Friday.
Yeah,
and we're a lot easier on each other, the three of us that work together on a Friday, because we're all, you know, we're at the end of it. Yeah. You don't want to have those hard conversations on Friday, whereas Monday morning, let's go.
Yeah, for sure. Hey guys, thank you so much. Jack Delosa, thank you. Thanks for joining me on Valentine's Day. Here on my
on your lines.
Thank you very much. Claire Kimball. Thanks guys. That's Taking Stock.